Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So, first of all, thank you all for joining us. And in today's session, we'll be discussing how technology leaders can better interpret market signals, plan for different future scenarios, and translate market intelligence into meaningful strategic decisions. So, we are very pleased to have Tim, an independent technology consultant with the Business Research Company. He will be sharing his perspective on how leaders can improve the way they use market intelligence to support real strategic decisions. With that, I'll hand it over to Tim.
Okay, thanks, Falguni. Hi, everybody. So this is the second webinar that I've given with TBRC. So the previous webinar was around gaps in market intelligence. Today's webinar is going to focus on the executives within technology vendors, essentially the boards, the CEO, the leadership. And the goal is to actually talk through some of the things that are front of mind, some of the potential signals and scenarios, and then how that then translates into strategic decisions. So the first slide in the presentation is probably the most important one to start with. So it's really to identify all the departments that exist within particularly a technology vendor. So obviously we're talking about B2B technology companies, vendors, hardware, software services, household names that we're all familiar with here. So if you think about the functions that exist within a particular vendor, I think these can be classified as very much internal, operational, back office functions on the right-hand side of the slide, all the way through to client-facing revenue generation functions on the other. Now, the back office functions would be things like the innovation, the R&D, so actually the technologies that are being incubated within the vendor. And we'll talk a little bit about how we need to get those, the tech vendors need to get those quicker to market. They need to take all the bright information, all the work done by the bright people in the laboratories. They need to bring that to market in the form of new products, new solutions, new software. But also you've got other back office functions such as finance, obviously processing all the money, legal compliance. That's very important in the tech sector, particularly things like data privacy, meeting regulatory requirements, and then procurement departments. Now, if you move to perhaps a little bit more towards the client facing, you've then got the IT departments, the operational functioning of the companies. And then you've got this very important function within tech vendors, which is product development and product management. And those are the people that are really taking the good work that's happening in the laboratories and turning those into meaningful products that they then bring to market. Overlaid across all of that are as I said, the revenue generating, the client facing functions. So sales and marketing, clearly very, very important parts of tech firm. And then you've got a strategy business development function, which is really perhaps looking at which markets to enter, the timelines around product releases, those types of things. So very much the corporate development. And then overlaid on top of that is, as part of that client facing focus, you've also got customer experience type functions within a firm. Now, if you think about the C-suites or the executive leadership, they've got oversight of as to everything that's going on. That doesn't mean to say they're going to be involved in all the decision making and all the thinking, but they absolutely, everything will filter up into them. But I think some of those functions are perhaps a little bit closer to the CEO. So particularly the strategy business development function, they will be presenting to the board on a regular basis with some of their ideas around how to grow the firm, enhance the firm's reputation, expand into new markets. And obviously the sales and marketing function will be very much involved in driving the revenues, the pipeline, the product positioning, the messaging as well. So I think the important point to make is that whilst the C-suite may not naturally have relationships with market intelligence firms directly. A lot of the time, the conduit into the executives is from these functions that sit within the firm. So if we move on to the next slide. So this slide shows some of the activities, some of the it's less around the functions, but it shows some of the things that need to happen, some of the decision making that the CEO will have oversight of. Now, I think the important point to make is if you look on the slide, as I said, there's very much an inward looking, a back office focus, and then more of a front office focus. But if you look on the slide, there's a movement from tactical activities through to strategic activities. Now, the further right on the slide, it's the strategic activities which the executives in the firm are going to be more involved in. So clearly things like mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures will absolutely involve the board, as will business strategies, what their business models are going to be. And then product innovation is a really important part of a tech vendor's what a tech vendor needs to do. So they obviously having to regularly change their products, evolve their products, enhance their products based on new technologies. So now on the other side, I think things like pricing, whilst they may run that past whilst that may be run past the board, I think things like pricing falls more in the remit of the chief revenue officer, the sales officer, as would marketing campaigns very much be within the realm of the chief marketing officer. And client services also tends to sit with sales marketing or just the customer success as well. So in the middle, you've got some functions that I think the board will definitely be interested in: partnerships, alliance, obviously the financial targets, the go-to-market tactics. But it is these functions that are slightly over to the right, which definitely are of more interest in from the board. So expansion into new markets. How do we position ourselves against competitors? What are we doing with our supply chains? How are we reconfiguring our supply chains? Do we need to enhance and improve our supply chains to get our products to market? These kinds of initiatives the board will be 100% interested in. So if we move on to the next slide, I think it's this important point around why might the board want to use market intelligence? This very much ties into what TBRC does. So I think it's 7 or so areas that we can distill this down into. So market identification is absolutely key. So I think we can think of markets as geographical entities, like new markets to enter, but they're also emerging markets, technology markets as well. So where are these new opportunities? And that's where good research really helps. I think product optimization is very important. So I think these tech firms, they need to get that feedback from end user customers. Is the technology product ready to be consumed? Is the demand there? Do the IT buyers and decision makers understand the product? Are they ready to implement it? Or is it something there's a bit of a lag? Would we be first to market? In which case, is that the right time to enter the market? So this product optimization, it actually relates to customer understanding. And I think business research, whether that's in the form of surveys, in the form of conversations, in the form of study groups, CIO workshops, these are the types of intelligence that the board is going to really value. I think the fourth point here is this is really key. It's that ability to spot the trends and articulate the trends in a way that's meaningful. So vendors are going to, whilst the tech industry is, I think it can be highlighted as a very, there's a lot of co-opetition, so a lot of competition plus cooperation. So tech firms, perhaps more so than other industries, do share information, do glean off one another. But a lot of times firms may not be in a position to perhaps identify the trends because they don't have all the touch points into the customers. They might believe their own hype a little bit, and they look for that third-party validation of what's going on. So I think that trend identification is really important. And then obviously a market is comprised of buyers, sellers, but competitors as well. So competitive intelligence becomes very key. Are there new competitors emerging into a particular market? Why are some competitors doing better than others at the moment? Why are they getting invited for RFPs when maybe we're not? Why are we missing out? So that sort of tactical intelligence, but also strategic intelligence around competitor activity is really key. And then vendors, they may need to form partnerships. So these partnerships could actually be around their products. So you could take the best of two tech firms, merge them together, and actually really come out with a new strong product to market. But the partnerships could also be on a distribution level. So how can we work with distributors, with value-added resellers to get products into new markets? And then I think the final point is perhaps with a tech firm, it's always interesting because their own solutions, in many cases, if it's enterprise resource planning, desktop workplace solutions, supply chain management solutions, cloud-based technology, a lot of their own technologies can be implemented in-house to improve their operations. So there's always that need to use market intelligence to actually benefit their own business, improve efficiencies, improve processes, become operationally more effective. And I think intelligence that helps to do that is also very much valued. So that's just an initial intro. I'm going to look at some potential signals in the next slide. But I think before we go on to there, we were going to have a quick break for any questions at this stage.
Yeah, hello Tim. I have a question.
Hi.
Yeah, in many companies, there is no single owner of market intelligence. From your experience, should market intelligence be centralized under a strategy function or embedded across departments?
So I think that's a very good question. I think it depends slightly on the size of the vendor. So I think for smaller vendors, I actually think there's a real benefit in having market intelligence that's centralized. And I think the logical place for it to reside is if we go back 2 or 3 slides, Falguni.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
That's it. One more. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, if we go back 2 or 3 slides, I think it's that strategy business development function, which is that's a very logical place for market intelligence to sit, especially when it's strategic in nature. So perhaps the more tactical information might come more with sales and marketing. But I think for the smaller firms, it makes sense. Now, for bigger firms, I actually think there's value in having market intelligence distributed around the organization. So that could be market intelligence purely for the channel function. It could be purely for the product management function, product development function, or it could be purely for sales and marketing for the tactical intelligence. So at a very simplistic level, I think it depends on the size of the company.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So if we move on to are there any other questions at this stage? We have 2 more pauses for questions, by the way. So if you've got a question, there'll be another opportunity to answer it.
Yes, Tim. Hi.
Hi.
I have a question. Yeah. Many companies generate strong strategic insights but struggle to operationalize them. In your experience, how can organization close the gap between strategic insight and execution?
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I think that's again a very good question. So I think some of this it's actually cross sector. So I think it depends very much around the systems and processes that exist within the company. But I think for me, it's that regularity of feeding in the intelligence on a quarterly basis, absolutely, and maybe even on a monthly basis, because some of these technology trends are happening very, very quickly, and you need that intelligence to be able to react to what's going on, whether it's in terms of new technology development, new competitor activity, new market entry. So I think the actual turning the intelligence into actual strategies, obviously the strategic thinking needs to happen at the C-suite level, but then it's very much about the execution that happens within the different functions within the firm following that. Okay, good. So if we move on to some of the signals then. So I had a think around some of the signals that the executive leadership may need to be looking out for, and I categorized them into 5 areas. So I think signals at a very high level, they can identify opportunities, they can identify threats, but they can also signal shifts in market direction. And I think technology signals can be happening in a few different areas, and I think the tech vendors and the firms need to be on guard and look out for those signals. So I think at a technology and product level, this could be things like supply of semiconductors. Semiconductor supply can have quite a big bearing on the performance of a tech firm in terms of their product development, bringing products to market. So that would be a good example of one. I think data center capacity and the build out of data centers is another important technology signal, something that firms need to look out for. And I think there's a shift in data center capacity and where data is housed and located. We'll come on a little bit to geopolitics in a minute, but also things like data protection and regulations. That's another important technology shift. And then you've got things like the ability to integrate new products and solutions into technology vendors' platforms that might be a little bit more operational. But these vendors, I mean, the tech industry is typically categorized by leadership that is quite tech savvy. So you don't tend to get general working at the top of tech firms. They tend to have come up through the labs, through the incubation development of the products themselves. If you think of all the Magnificent Seven, as they're called, the big tech leaders they're all extremely technical individuals. So, but they absolutely need that intelligence to stay on top of the market signals. From an operational and competitive perspective, as with other firms, I think this is where tech vendors, the tech leadership is going to have to look at things like energy costs, shipping costs. They're going to have to look at new market entry. Have their competitors moved into new markets? Have competitors suddenly emerged and appeared? They need to stay on top of that. Now, they might not do that themselves as individuals, but they'll absolutely be relying on people within their companies to speak to them and talk to them around what's going on. So it could be something like a new vendor suddenly appears and is getting a lot of sponsorship, a lot of marketing. They're opening stalls at events, and you have to stay on top of what's going on there. So I think these are important signals to maybe lead to a change in strategy, which we'll come on to in a few slides' time. Financial and funding signals. Obviously, so much of business strategy requires finance behind it. The sort of loosening of finance to make strategic decisions is absolutely key. The activities of venture capital firms making investments, the types of the money supply that goes into that, and I think that financial landscape and funding landscape can and does shift quite quickly. It's obviously been tougher times for businesses in a lot of markets around the world, but that's not to say that things could get loosened, and that loosening of the finance could actually represent a great opportunity or a more defensive position related to the vendor strategy. So I think those signals are absolutely key and central for the leadership to look out for. And then there's the macroeconomic environment. So at a very simple level, which markets are growing strongly? What is the projected growth for a set of markets? Is this the time to enter a new market? How would we go about doing that? But that market intelligence around the macroeconomics is absolutely essential to make the right decisions. Obviously, things can change very quickly. As we know, we live in a volatile world at the moment, but there's still the baseline macroeconomics. Vendors still going to rely on those, and then the regulatory environment can change very quickly. I think I touched on this in my last webinar, and we were talking a little bit about social media uptake and how that has currently been banned in Australia for under 16s, but in the UK, this is also being considered at the moment. So that could have an impact on social media companies' activity in this market, clearly. So, but it's not just the sort of client-facing technologies. I mean, regulation could absolutely relate to compliance requirements, as I said, around where data is supported, around compliance requirements, around security and things like that. So these are all signals that the leadership needs to stay on top of. And then you've got some other shifts and signals in the market which are important around people, organization and talent. Are lots of new hires being making, for example, by another firm? Has a new strategic appointment been made by another firm? That might signal a change in direction from a key competitor. Have new offices been opened? What impact could this have on the resourcing within my own company if I'm the tech leader? Do I need to think about my certifications, my accreditations around the skills that are related to deploying my technology? So if I'm Cisco, how am I tracking the take up of my sort of Cisco engineers qualifications, and is that education still best in class? What are other networking vendors doing? So I think this monitoring of what's happening with the talent pool is actually another very important thing that the technology leadership needs to undertake. So if we move on to the next slide, I've got some case studies in this presentation around how market intelligence might be used. This case study is a leading hardware manufacturer, and it uses market intelligence for forecasting, market sizing, and market share information. And actually, it's got the market intelligence embedded into its company processes. So the market information feeds into the C-suite every quarter, and it looks very much around vendor performance. So this vendor is able to map its own performance against its competitors. But one of the things that the market intelligence is absolutely vital for is it actually helps the executive team respond to questions from investors relating to market shifts. So essentially, if you think of it this way, a senior executive, half the job, at an absolutely simplistic level, half the job is managing the operations and the performance of the firm internally. But the other half of the job is actually communicating to shareholders and investors around company direction, market performance, communicating that strategy. And actually, it is using the market intelligence that it gains to absolutely communicate to those investors around the company direction. So it's just absolutely pivotal to what it's doing, and that can then clearly impact its share price and the way it's perceived. So this vendor obviously looks at the supply chain performance of its competitors as well. So that there's a competitive element to the market intelligence. So it needs those signals around how are its competitors performing, what's their distribution model, how long are they holding inventory for, those kinds of things. And then it also needs to stay on top of the changes in the market, the shifts in the market. And this vendor has got some AI-enabled products which could lead to some real revenue-generating opportunities. And it actually wants to understand what the demand for those products might be. It uses third-party market intelligence to actually size those markets. So that's just how some of the signals might be used internally. If we move on to the next slide, this is looking at the scenarios. And then the following slide from that just drills into what some of the scenarios might be. So I suppose at the top level, the executives, they need to plan for a range of scenarios. They almost need, every year, let's be honest, we all have our own plans for 2026, and then we react to what changes. And it's clearly no different for executives. They can try and predict as best they can, but things will emerge that they perhaps hadn't foreseen. So in terms of emerging tech, there's all sorts of new technologies that have emerged in recent years, and some of those are at different adoption life cycles. Some of them are very much in laboratories, but some are being brought out to market. So things like quantum computing, agentic AI, these are all things that have emerged very recently. Digital twins, all these emerging technology shifts could have an impact on product development for the firms. And then there's also this potential to automate lots of things. So the agentic AI and automation, that clearly lots of CEOs, they're looking at business processes, they're looking at things that could be done quicker, faster, more effectively. And they're trying to adapt, even more so in the tech sector, because of the technical nature of the leadership. It's the most natural fit of all the industries to actually adopt some of these emerging technologies. So scenarios, as I said, these things can change very, very quickly. Things can be brought to market extremely quickly, and every executive has to stay on top of that. It's not just the technology-related pressures that they're under. They may be under sort of economic pressures. So, for example, obviously instability in the Middle East. There's now some talk around changes to interest rates, potential for inflation based on energy supply, and this again not entirely. This wasn't entirely foreseen. So the technology leadership needs to adapt to these economic pressures. There may be operational pressures as well, perhaps based on distribution, supply chains, those kinds of things, based on resourcing, people availability, travel, all sorts of things. So again, these are scenarios that the leadership needs to stay on top of. And then related to all that is as I said, geopolitical instability. So there might, in the semiconductor sector, some sort of concerns perhaps around semiconductor supply chains as well, things that leadership has started to look at, and very much the prices for, obviously things can change, the cost base can change for technology supply quite quickly. So there may need to be some focus on that, some gaming of scenarios, some trying to play the markets as best as possible to make the right investment decisions, particularly around inventories. So that's again a fourth scenario. And then finally, I think cybersecurity and trust is very much always on the mind of technology leadership, primarily operationally. If you look at not necessarily a pure play technology vendor, but Jaguar Land Rover, large UK car manufacturer, got hit by a cyber attack, and that led to its production line being halted. So absolutely a need for tech executives to stay on top of that, remain cyber resilient. I think sadly the reality is that most of these vendors are going to be attacked. It's just a question of how they react to that, how they deal with that. Do they have the cybersecurity systems in place to ensure that this doesn't damage their firm's operations? So you've got that, and then you've got things like data privacy, compliance requirements, how those might change. Again, these are all points that the tech leadership needs to stay on top of. So if we move on to the next slide, we were going to talk about some of the. Oh, I'm sorry. We've got another slide here on a case study here. So this is a case study of some scenario planning. This one is actually a Far East semiconductor manufacturer. I think they're based in Singapore, and they're embedding silicon into their products. So they're absolutely looking at market intelligence for its quantitative data qualities, and they want to understand the silicon-related opportunity, particularly as it regards to AI, and they look for market intelligence that can help them size their total addressable market and show them the tech trends. So what they look for from a provider is very much data information, and the market intelligence provider has to rethink through the dimensions of that. So it could be data split by geography, technology, type of application, but it's also this scenario planning. I think it's the tech. I think I alluded to it in one of the earlier slides. It's the technology evolution, the market trend identification, how customer demand might change, how the competitor dynamics. So they want a mix of quantitative data to help them size their opportunity and total addressable market, but qualitative insights that marries with that market data as well. So if we move on to the next slide, I was going to have another quick, a penultimate pause for questions, if there are any questions at this stage before we get into the strategic decisions. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide after this one. So how fundamentally does this all boil down into strategic decisions for the tech leadership? Again, I think you can look at these in a few different areas. So this is where we get to the nub of the presentation, really. So they've got some complex decisions to make, executives, and they have to make those. Whilst there's obviously a timeline for making them at certain points in the year, they have to stay on. They have to be thinking about all of these areas at any point in time. So I think in the top right, you've got their products and portfolio strategy. So a lot of tech vendors' products have to bring them out to market very quickly. They might see a real opening for translating what they've developed in-house into new products that they can take to market. But they've also got to think about, is the customer base ready for that? Is the market may not be defined yet. How quickly could the market move? So they've got some market and customer strategy to think about. Should they move into new markets as well? So I think that with markets, you think very much horizontally in terms of the market that relates to technology products, but then you also think about markets, new geographical markets that they could actually enter, for example, or potentially also new vertical markets. And if you look over to the other side, that go-to-market and ecosystem strategy, they might have to think very carefully about their channel-to-market strategy, their distribution model, how they hold their inventories, how they incentivize partners to work with them. What sort of margins will the partners make by distributing their products? How do they rate the partners? How do they train the partners on the products? Because the partners are ultimately the ones that deploy them. So they've got that to look at. And then they've also got an operational focus, a technical focus, just enhancing their own business operations. And as I said earlier, they can use, in many cases, the technologies they've deployed themselves to actually enhance their own operations and better bring their products to market. And then wrapped around all of that, they need to look at their business models. Business models may change slightly. They may have entirely new opportunities to bring a new product to market. They may need to look at perhaps the licensing, the subscriptions of their products. They might need to look at the after deployment care, but also just they might be looking, because of the pace of technology change, they might have an opportunity to move into an entirely new market, adjacent markets, and that might presuppose a whole new business model, whole new business strategy as well. So, as I said, all of these things will be in CEOs' minds when they're thinking about their technology products and their services. There will be touch points in a particular year where they will be actually defining these, perhaps to the other members of the board, to investors. But equally, some of these strategic changes could happen tomorrow based on some of the signals and scenarios that we talked about previously. There may need to be the beginnings of a change of strategic direction. And as I said before, that strategic direction can happen very, very quickly. So if we move on to the next slide, this is a case study of how a technology vendor is using market intelligence with its strategic planning. So I've talked a little bit about the pace of change, the velocity in the market. I think there's also sectors that perhaps move over a slightly longer time horizon. So this vendor is very strong in aerospace and defence and operational technology as well, in things like critical national infrastructure. And it actually uses market intelligence to feed into its own internal market model. So it marries some of that in-house proprietary data, which it wouldn't release to anybody else, with some of the data that it receives from a market intelligence firm. And it uses that information to make 5 to 10 year business plans and investment choices, to make sure to try and identify when the best time to enter markets is, or whether not to invest in markets at all. It's that ability to capture market development. So it needs that, as well as the quantitative data, it needs that insight into the trends as well. And then this information actually gets fed up into the board in the form of internal reporting documents. And then the board and the whole investor relations part of the business actually uses that information to support external communication. And the data also is used to monitor and forecast its own investment in its capital investment in technology and its operational expenditure as well. So that's a case study of how market intelligence is used for strategic planning for a large aerospace and defence technology vendor. So if we move on to the final slide that I had, was just to give some thought again, almost to circle back. If I was in technology leadership position in a vendor, what I would be looking for from my market intelligence provider. I think, as I've said, it's a little bit of a summary slide, but that ability to identify emerging trends is really important. That could be in the form of written reports. It could be in the form of being able to pick the brains of analysts. It could be in the form of podcasts, all sorts of information dissemination approaches. But it's just, what you don't want to see is some particularly in the tech sector, some old terminology, some outdated insights. You need a provider that's very much on top of what's emerging and changing. I think it's also good when the analysts have visibility, have a good market presence, that are cited regularly in the sector. I think that's also something that's really important to look out for. And I think market authority, defining market trends, shaping the narrative and terminology, I think is also key. I've spoken to a few people in the technology sector in recent weeks, and I think there's very much this view that analysts and customers should be defining markets, perhaps more so than the technology vendors themselves. Sure, the technology vendors develop the products, but actually it's that uptake and the demands, and that can absolutely be shaped by good market intelligence. I think the other thing that's really key is just to capture all the opportunities. So I think data sets really need to be comprehensive. They need consistent metrics. I think you need that ability to compare across tech markets. I think particularly geographical markets. I think you don't want that research to be standalone and not set in context. So I think good, strong data sets are absolutely important there. And then I think another important attribute of a tech vendor would be just the way they can facilitate the industry to actually share information and collaborate. And I think this is definitely, as I said before, this is something that the tech sector is very good at with its co-opetition, as the term is used. But I think the market intelligence provider can absolutely sit in the middle there, and they can facilitate that. And then the final one, I think this understanding that what customers are looking for, customer demands, customers' perception of emerging technologies, I think is absolutely key. So customer sensing, that can come in the form of, I think that obviously the tried and trusted method is surveys, whether online surveys, telephonic surveys, but also in-depth interviews with people on the coalface as well, and really get that feel for. I think if we tie it back to some of the things we talked about in the presentation today, it would be, is the market ready to adopt the technology that the technology vendor has developed? What sort of messages will resonate with the end users? I think that's a really important thing, and I think market intelligence, which can speak to those end user decision makers, is really, really valuable. So I think that was my final slide. I think our next slide is Q&A. So we have the full hour, but we've talked for 45 minutes. If anybody has any questions or thoughts or observations, I'm obviously here now to address them, or we could also do them after the webinar is completed.
Yeah,
I have
Tim.
one question, which I'm not sure how fully on topic it is, but some of the software providers, the SaaS providers, have been there's been some kind of worries about them, but particularly in the financial markets recently, about them being threatened by AI, specifically by Claude, I think it was. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on that and on that, how that might affect the way that tech companies are thinking.
Yes, so Claude is in the chat GPT, isn't it? It's
yes,
generative AI.
Specifically, it was some of these companies like I don't know, the Salesforce and things like that. I think the concern was basically it's become easier to create the kind of software that these companies have developed, and therefore they might be in a vulnerable position to lots of lower cost competition from people who have created similar softwares from quickly through AI.
Yeah, so it's actually what the technology scenario is that it's actually opened up the market. It's changed the competitive landscape, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's the CEO in that situation has to react to that very much in the form of strengthening the products, identifying the difference between these low-cost market entrants, perhaps through all the after-sales support, and just it's a defensive strategy. I suppose, unfortunately, it's a new reality, isn't it? That in so many different areas, this ability to generate content and create new sort of new competing products is just a feature of the CEO landscape. But it's absolutely very much just leaning on that customer experience and focusing on those your existing customer base, and then perhaps try to discredit some of these new market entrants. I did actually have a point going in slight tangent but related. I had an interesting conversation with someone this week about software as a service and a shift back towards slightly more on-premise technology solutions as being something that enterprises want, and it's related to the geopolitics of just keeping our IT systems within the organization where there's slightly better control, and particularly around this data sovereignty as well. So perhaps concerns that our proprietary business data might be offshored in another geography, and we might want to sort of bring some of our technology back in house and on premise. So that's something as well, as well as the point you made about the SaaS leaders having to deal with sort of low cost market entrants. They're also having to deal with perhaps this shift back toward a little bit of a shift back towards on-premise solutions based on the geopolitics that's in the news every day.
Yeah, but I think what some people have suggested, this concern might be overblown because of the depth of the relationship that these providers have with a lot of their enterprise clients, or can have. So maybe it'll push more more focus and more market intelligence around those customer relationships, really knowing their customers so well, because just because there's an equivalent product out there, it doesn't mean that people are necessarily going to big companies are necessarily going to adopt it easily. There's a lot that goes into those decisions and those relationships, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it may be these low-cost entrants perhaps open up some newer, cheaper market opportunities that the bigger vendors could take advantage of further down the line once there's a bit of market traction. But you would think they're unlikely to displace, given that SaaS is such a critical piece of software in a large enterprise. You think the newer entrants would be unlikely to displace those because of, I mean, as I said, all the security implications, all the changing environment because of automated attacks and things like that. That's going to mean that larger enterprises will stick with the tried and trusted, given that they'll be better placed to handle those issues.
Thank you.
I saw on the chat that Emma had a question, but that may have been one of the questions from the first pause.
Tim, we have this question for the case study on the leading IT solutions provider. This is on the last slide that you covered. So the question goes, the case study on the leading IT solution provider mentioned using intelligence to support 5 to 10-year business plans. In such a fast-changing environment, how can companies ensure that long-term forecasts remain relevant and adaptable over time?
Yes, so companies, do you mean the market intelligence providers or the vendor? I'll answer.
Hello.
Hi, sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Did you mean the market intelligence?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so So obviously, I think one of the themes of the presentation, as I think I touched on earlier, is the speed, the pace of change, and it is easy to get wrapped up in that. But I think for B2B technology, I think this is a feature of the vendor landscape, how quickly markets can change and move. And as I say, something like security would be a great example. Defending against security threats and being resilient against cyber security is something that is a daily, minutely issue, right? But I think there are other markets, and this vendor is very much, it's defense systems, it's aircraft, it's those kinds of things. So it's this hardware is going to be invested in with a view of it remaining operational for 15, 20 years. So absolutely, it needs to future-proof what it does. It needs to look at demands and shifts, and some of this market intelligence could absolutely, it could predict population shifts, consumer behaviors, and how that might relate to aircraft demand, for example. So I think there is still a need for that longer term outlook. I mean, it's very easy, obviously, in this day and age to get caught up in weekly, monthly geopolitics, but there's still that need for good, solid data and planning, good, solid data that will help with business planning. And also, that data can also be, those scenarios can actually be baked into it. So I would be looking, if I was a technology vendor, I would be looking for a market intelligence provider that I know has got that flexibility, perhaps to adapt their models, can react quickly to changes. A good example might be, say, the tariff regime, which was very much a central part of the global economy a year or so ago. So a good market intelligence provider is going to be able to react to that, update their numbers, and maybe even partner with a technology vendor, as is the case in this example, where you've got the data actually feeding into the tech vendor's own business planning. And obviously they're making investment decisions around that, whether it's on people, whether it's on factories, it's on supply chains, is it on partnership ecosystems. So absolutely, let's not, whilst a lot of my presentation has been around short-term change, let's not be so distracted that we don't think about the longer-term horizon for the company and what the company's trying to do.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Yeah. With emerging technology shifts happening quickly, how can executives distinguish between short lived technology hype and innovations that will fundamentally reshape industries?
That's a really good question. I think it's at a simplistic level, I think it's that difference between fads or fashion-based things that happen. So if you think about a lot of consumer technologies and, say, applications or social media or things like that, a lot of these things, these trends, they can be global and they can change very quickly, and new vendors or software providers being a good example, they can emerge really, really quickly. But I think it's really identifying those paradigm shifts. And I think obviously front and center of everyone's conscience at the moment is AI, but clearly some of the things that AI can do in terms of opening up new possibilities, opening up new markets, solving problems. From a technology vendor point of view, it's like what are the business opportunities, the operational efficiencies, the automation, the potential there. I think the market intelligence and the market intelligence can absolutely help the strategic leadership separate the structural shift from the noise, so to speak. So I hope that's a thought for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
None as of now.
Okay.
I just wanted to understand, Tim, a bit of your background towards how can tech companies be more proactive with the changes that are happening, and should they be more risk averse, or should they be reacting or responding with time for the changes and the advancements that are quite rapid at the moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would actually say they need to be both proactive and reactive. So they need to be proactive because they've got to bring products to market, and they've got to be constantly thinking out in the future. They've got to be incubating the next sets of technologies, but they absolutely need to be reactive to what's going on around them from their competition, primarily their competition, but other elements of the tech sector. So it's both, it's both proactive and reactive, which is a lot of it's a real challenge in the sector, but that's what they need to do.
All right, that sounds about right. Thank you.
Just a final point for the people on the call. We've got some other webinars coming up, so we will look at some of the other functions in a little more depth within technology vendors themselves, such as sales and marketing, in particular, and I think maybe procurement as well.
Yes, that's right, Tim. We have more in the series. This is just a part of one of our ongoing series. And in addition to the tech webinars, we also have webinars on healthcare and even another series called Mastering Business Research. So, yes, if there are no further questions, I think we can conclude. Okay, then thank you very much. Thank you, Tim, for this valuable insight. And thank you, everyone who joined us for this session. And please keep an eye out for the upcoming invitations. We look forward to having you join us again in our future sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you.